Welcome back to Betting the Limit. I'm your host, Bruce Shore. Today we're going to be joined by one of the top minds in athletic performance, Matt Shaw. He's the head strength and conditioning coach for the University of Denver. Matt has been an integral part behind DU's championship culture, working closely with some of the best athletes across all sports. Matt trains people in not only hockey, but also basketball, football, and lacrosse. During the off-season, Matt works with some of the NHL's best players, including Devon Toews, Troy Terry, and the former great Paul Stastny. Welcome to the show. How are we doing?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Good. It's cool doing this in here. I don't know if you saw the old gym that I used to work out in here.
Yep. I remember seeing the videos right before I got here. The 1,000 square foot space, and now it's like 10 times the size in the closet that you guys used to work out in.
We used to too. We used to start our workouts at 7. Some guys in class, I think it's 7:50. So guys would come in hungover. Now looking at the setup you guys have now, it's quite the difference.
Yeah, it's a beautiful space for the athletes to enjoy and come in and take care of their bodies in different ways. I mean, everything from space to roll out, do soft tissue work, sports science tech down there to do force plate testing and integrated sports science work, to doing agility, yoga, and it's enough space to do everything.
We were never very good when I was here. I think we ended up making I never made the Frozen Four here. We were the first ranked team. My freshman year got knocked out of the first round. Do you think the addition of all of these facilities has been one of the reasons that you guys have been able to have the success over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think really in the last 10 years, you've seen almost like an arms race behind resources and how universities now are supporting the student athlete experience, right? So whether it's the changes in nutrition and the old school mentality of you couldn't provide an athlete a bagel with peanut butter because it's classified as a meal, to now an open forum behind providing athletes meals a day, access to facilities like this, and tech. I think like all those things play into the physical development of athletes and ensuring that they're developing the right way to support, whether it's the on ice, on court, or on field performance as they develop across their lifespan of college athlete.
Yeah, I recall when I was playing here, I think we got pre-game meal. I don't even think we got post-game meal. What are the players getting now on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so resources here in the last probably 6 or 7 years, nutrition like completely changed. So now we provide lunch for our hockey athletes at the end of every single practice. Within the weight room, they can grab and go things like wraps, yogurt parfaits, fresh fruit, things like that, bars, chocolate milk, jerky, trail mix. I mean, like it's grab and go as needed every day. And then they have every pre-game meal, post-game meal, breakfast the next morning. I mean, it's like the food side has completely changed in the last 10 years. And really the thing that we've seen is just developmental markers have completely changed. The athletes are recovering better. They're leaner now than they used to be. They're better supported with, proper nutrition, and the quality of the food that we're providing them has changed. So I think it's just constantly giving them the resource they need to not only support them in the college environment, but also teaching habits. So we're integrating in our sports nutritionist now that supports them from not only an educational standpoint, but we do lifestyle skill training, so things like knife skills. We get a chef in to do food demos and cooking skills with them. So we're setting them up for the rest of their careers professionally to take care of their bodies, before, after, and everything in between for their careers.
I think the stability of the program here is a lot different. I think I had 3 or 4 different strength coaches when I was here. You've been here for 13 years, like we talked about prior to starting this. I think that most of the coaches have been on the hockey side, been here for 7, 8 years now. As a guy like yourself, who has had a lot of other opportunities outside of school, what has made this place such a great place to work? Because you obviously aren't leaving.
Yeah. I just think like University of Denver it's an anomaly within college athletics. We're not a Power 5 institution that is financially supported by football. We are a small private institution of 6,000 students, and yet we hit above our belt across almost every sport here. And the thing that has allowed us to create success is, I think, just developmentally, investing into different areas differently. I mean, our athletes, I think of even the difference in the off-season periods. Our athletes here, we had almost 50% of our athletes here in voluntary periods across the summertime. investing into being on-site, developing, whether they're have care hours like basketballs or they're not, like hockey or almost every other sport. But they want to be here, they want to train, they want to get the most out of their development, and then that springboards them into the next season. And then we have some of the best coaches in the country across every sport. From the hockey, the gymnastics, the lacrosses, the soccers that are perennial top 10 teams in the country, all the way down to tennises, where men's tennis 2 years ago was an undefeated team in the country going into NCAAs. Every single team here is now pushing the boundaries behind team performance and success.
The average player has gotten so much better now than they were when I was going to college. Like, I think the best player in college hockey now as a freshman from like a talent and skill level is way more skilled than it was back then. What have you noticed has been the biggest change in the athlete today from what you've seen, at least when you started here 13 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think like if you follow the path and the rise of social media influence and the education of our athletes coming in, one, I think, when you have exposure behind seeing what pros are doing in the off season, their investment level behind their physical development, their nutrition, their lifestyle, and not only that, you also have now expert specialists that are providing free resources to the public and being able to provide information to student athletes to see what's actually going on, and even an inside look like the documentary side of, I think like quarterbacks or like the track and field one on Netflix and golf. Now all these documentaries are, I think, creating an open door behind the scenes looks of like how committed these athletes are that have reached the upper echelon of their sports. And it's changed around the commitment level and the approach behind, I think, year in and year out, all of our athletes coming in. We have athletes that, now it almost puts me in a role where it's like I'm an active consultant behind like deciphering, what's actually right and what's wrong in terms of information that's being provided out there. But they come in and they want to talk about breathing mechanics. They want to talk about nutritional commitment behind, achieving certain developmental markers behind body composition or improving like whole food intake. And it's giving them the support to provide them the resources to do those things within the college environment, which is complicated. I mean, like, this is an environment where your athletes aren't just athletes, they're students, and they're taking 20, 30 hours of class and studying per week, and then you're mixing that with the athletic demand and their schedules of travel and practice volume and the social stress, the social scene of drinking and things like that. And you're saying, can you go out every weekend and perform at your highest level? And so I think there's just been a really huge rise into professionalism and athletes changing their commitment level behind all these different areas that go into performance.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because at the NHL level, like, the amount of drinking has gone down significantly. These kids are in college, they want to have a college experience. Some of the NHL players, I would say, the majority of them are spending a lot less time on alcohol. Maybe they're enjoying other substances that aren't as harmful on their body. But how has that translated into like collegiate players?
Yeah, I think there's examples of athletes out there that have, I think, made the commitment to avoid alcohol in season and have found a lot of success. And I think that those, when you have pros that are modeling those types of behaviors and taking on higher levels of commitment within the pro environment, it's only going to impact everyone downstream. We've seen an uptick of athletes that have come into the college environment and they are just abstaining straight up from alcohol because they know that they're trying to achieve things developmentally. And they're trying to get to the next level, and they're willing to do whatever is necessary, I think, to achieve those goals.
Do you think certain athletes take that too far? Like, I see it a lot with kids these days where they're so dialed to the point I think it's actually a little bit detrimental to them. Like, say they're wearing a Whoop every day and they wake up on game day and it says they're tired. Well, a lot of guys, that can throw into a complete tantrum mentally. Where I feel like, from my experiences, the top guys are the hardest working guys and the most detailed, but also have some element of flexibility within their day-to-day lifestyle.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think everything that you do in life is on a spectrum, right? And I think when you start to focus just on like the internal and physical side, and then you lose sight of like just the creativity and the involvement of like how you practice and having fun within your sport, it can move you into a different level. It almost puts constraint within how you play and how you operate within your life. So I think, like, you do all these things to teach people how to control lifestyle, because in a lot of ways, when athletes come in, maybe that's the thing that's the most impactful in terms of missing education or missing resources behind how they are going to develop. But then once they understand the fundamentals and the things that can create consistency, I think beyond that, it's like you want them to have like a level of risk taking in how they practice or how they live their life in terms of like being able to get creative in other ways, not putting these guardrails up and being so rigid within a lifestyle that it takes away from their development in creativity and being able to express their physical traits, within how they perform.
Your ability to train some of the best players in the NHL, I think, goes a little bit beyond, you're going to laugh when I say this, but there's a lot of smart people in the world who can fucking tell people what tempo they should be doing on lunges and stuff. But you seem to be able to develop a relationship with these guys because you have the ability to kind of care for them a little bit outside the weight room. How much do you think about that, or is it more just train them well when they're in here and the rest will follow?
Yeah, I think you got to be a human and a person first, like being able to, I think, have conversation with the guys, like how they're doing, how they're dealing with their lifestyle or their families, what's going on. Like it gives you insight, I think, into the challenge that these guys are going through. So I think, even as I've started a family, we have 2 young kids, like now we're in a time period where some of our younger pros now are going through the same thing. And we've, now it's like that relationship's changed. It's like, we'll laugh about different circumstances that are going on within their families and just the obstacles of having kids that are really young and the lack of sleep or the inconsistency with nutrition on those sides. But I think, being able to be human about things and also understanding that these guys are being put in situations of high stress for 8 to 9 months out of a year. And they have to get away from those things in a lot of ways in the off season so it doesn't run them down and physically put them in a spot where it's really difficult for them to maintain themselves. Like, our guys enjoy vacation, but also balancing the fact that like when they show up here, like they want to get better, they want to work hard, they want to work on specific things. And so it's, I think, finding ways of supporting them in those different avenues, like whether it's being able to be there just as an emotional sounding board or something that's going on within their family or their life, but then also being able to be a resource for them to support their physical development in different ways, whether it's biomechanically a limitation or whether it's producing different levels of force and maintaining their speed as they age and move into a long-term career within the sport. The big thing that we tell our college guys is that even when you come in here, it's like we're going to give you the foundations to be a long-term pro, but we'll always be here as a resource for you guys as you go through your entire career. We saw that with guys like Stas, who was on site here after his college age for 8 or 9 years as he finished out his career. And now you've got younger guys that I've worked with now for literally 12 years and have been in the pros for a long period of time. And so you get to see that change occur and then I think find ways of supporting them in the areas that they need as they age.
A lot of these NHL teams like to have control of their guys 365 days a year. I know a lot of players, I would say almost 95% of them, seek outside sources for a lot of different things. For the guys who come in here during the summer, are you also helping them with things during the season?
Yeah, I think like every guy's different with how they handle like in-season maintenance. I think the great thing about an NHL program is that they have great resources as well, right? Like they're going to have, I'd say now it's really changed in the last few years, but now most are investing into dietitians and registered sports experts and things like mental health and the sports psych side. From the training perspective, like I'll still get texts in season about, hey, like this is going on, and maybe it's like seeking outside counsel on how to handle certain things physically with, I think, understanding that these guys go through, contract negotiations and things that they're going to have to deal with during the in-season period. I get involved when they need me to and when I'm there as a resource for them. But I think that it's really making sure that we're providing our guys whatever care that they need across a year and not micromanaging those things, but realizing that like those guys are returning to a team that they're going to be there with them for an 8-month stint. And they're going to be there much longer periods of time than they are with me. So it's whatever we can do to communicate back and forth to create success together.
In your opinion, I think there's a huge divide between some people say you should train to be a hockey player, where other people say you should train to just be the best athlete you can be, and then that will translate on the ice. Where do you sit on that when you're developing your programming? How much do you weigh on that, both sides?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like when you look at like elite hockey players, their ability to perform on the ice is the only thing that matters in terms of their career success. However, I think what you see is that you have athletes that enter in even in the college environment that haven't ever gotten exposure behind anything off the ice. So we have athletes that come in that have never played another sport, that need to develop a bigger and wider foundation behind general physical skills that would allow them to then take their force expression, their movement on the ice to another level. But I think as athletes age and they get exposed to those things, like you have to be pretty precise with making changes and maintaining certain qualities behind what these guys are trying to do with on-ice speed expression, and as they age, maintaining their on-ice speed and their force production as they get older. Because at the end of the day, it's a speed game in the college or in the pro environment, even now in the college environment. And you know, as you age, it's like speed is going to be maybe the biggest thing that's going to alter across like the back half of your career. And so we really try to, one, I think, get guys like really good with general foundational movement skills, but then teaching them to get into the correct biomechanical positions that allow them to create the most success on the ice possible. So we go from general to very, very specific behind the positions, the postures that they're going to see on the ice, and then really creating speed and velocity demand as we go in the 8-year preseason.
Some people argue that hockey players are the most athletic professional athletes because you're obviously skating on a thin blade. I take the other side of that argument a lot. You train people basketball, you've done football, you've done wrestling. Who are your most athletic athletes?
I guess, one, I think it really depends on how you define athleticism. And like if it's the ability to transfer skills from one sport to another sport, then, hockey can be limited at times because you spend so much time with like learning how to do a different modality like skating that sometimes you lose the ability of things like running, sprinting, jumping. If it's purely like biomechanical and how you move and I think owning space and time, it's interesting because as you look at basketball players, their ability to manipulate their body and different velocities, and especially an athlete who can be upwards of close to 7 feet tall and what they're able to do with hand-eye as well as like moving in time and space, it's a pretty unique thing. But then you also look at other athletes like track athletes, and it's singular like movement, but their velocity expression is just so unique that, it's like you're literally looking at things that no one else in the world can do.
When a player comes back to train with you for the summer, how much do you tailor it to him specifically on what he needs to get better at versus kind of just having a generic program that guys kind of flow through so they get ready for the season?
Yeah, the big thing that we do is we base things off of movement and biomechanics. So the entire program is based off of a 3-dimensional approach, which every athlete, that is the foundation behind how they move on the ice. That's how they express force. And so what we end up doing is tweaking joint position and force velocity more than necessarily the exercise selection itself. So most of our guys are going to go through maybe the same movements, but how they produce force within those movements, there's a wide spectrum behind how efficient that they can be. So I think the biggest thing is that you have athletes that might be 6'6", and then you have another athlete who's 5'6", and their ability to express force, it needs to be very, very different relative to their body weight. And so it's making sure that we're pushing their force velocity curve up, and then can we get them good at expressing that force linearly, laterally, rotationally, vertically, and giving them the biggest, most robust, I think, way of making an athlete, and then getting it more narrowed in towards like hockey-specific joint angles and movement patterns as we go.
Most hockey guys deal with groin and hip injuries throughout their entire career. I actually remember this specifically. I had a ton of stuff, and then I started doing all your glute activation stuff a couple times a day, and that kind of changed my injury history during my career. What do you do specifically to combat that stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like years ago, I attended an education seminar as FNOR, which is Functional Neuro-Orthopedic Rehabilitation. And it was an approach based on neuroplasticity, which is a really complex way of like basically how fluid your brain is in terms of like remapping, how it's going to move in different contexts. And so what we started with was really like long duration isometrics around your hip in the early off-season period to eliminate compensation around your glute, getting guys away from like groin and adduction, or their groin and adductor compensating and extension, as well as like low back compensation. And since we've instituted those things, we were doing almost 18 minutes of isometrics across a 2-week, 3-week period. We've almost entirely eliminated incidents of low back pain. Guys are starting the off season in a great foundation behind how they are going into like hip dominant movement, and then it's about changing force velocity in all these different directions and really keeping their hip to be as durable as possible in adduction, abduction, internal and external rotation, hip extension and flexion, and creating balance across that hip girdle, knowing how much stress that these guys are under across the hip. And I think like the biggest risk that hockey athletes have is that their groin, their adductor are constantly at length. And it's like they're going through this extended position as they create their stride. And so what ends up happening as the season goes on, their adductor becomes relatively weak and overstretched. And so it's making sure that we keep things in check and we reinstitute adduction work and we re-strengthen those things and create balance in the early off-season period. And then we get them exposure by higher velocity work as we re-enter that preseason period going into the next season.
A lot of people say that the best players, the most competitive guys, are also the most athletic in the gym. I feel like that didn't necessarily always translate during my career. What have you seen from the guys you've worked with on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a spectrum. I would agree with you that in a lot of ways, I mean, like you can have an athlete that's come in that has incredibly high skill level, but then can be developmentally underdeveloped. I think the thing that you see is like, especially with hockey, like guys' minds and how they read the game, how they can, I think, dictate play on the ice with the guys that they're playing with, can be almost a completely different skill set than just how fast or how strong they are. And so every guy is working across this spectrum of development and how we can kind of fill in gaps behind their development and really try to give them not only like really support their strengths, but then continue to develop and bring up their weaknesses. And I think make them more well-rounded athletes on the ice and how they can create success long term.
I got criticized on a podcast recently for saying the best players that I came across during my career all seemed to have higher body fat. Like we're in more like the 10, not like high body fat, but like it was more in like the 8 to 12 range. And the guys who were like 6 and under were always getting hurt and had shit going on. Do you think that for a hockey player and just athlete in general, there is something where like on that spectrum where you are less likely to get hurt?
I think in my experience, there is, I think, a detriment to guys when they're too lean. Like when you get down and you're in like that 6 range or below, or even like 7 and below for certain guys that are more physical players, you can run out of juice and energy as the season goes on, especially if you're entering in preseason that low already. I think like really what you've seen is that maybe the more physical that a guy is, the more maybe they're like a 3rd or 4th line player and like that's their MO, the more that maybe it's like they don't need to be crazy lean and they can carry a few extra points on body comp. The same thing, like I can tell you right now out of experience that there's a lot of NHL teams that have shifted over the last 5 to 10 years behind those things. That certain positions or based on playing time or the type of player that you are, they're okay with guys entering in preseason at 10 to 12, knowing that they may lose a little bit of weight as the season goes on and as their volume and their time on ice is shifted up. And I think I think also understanding that how much extra weight are you carrying and how is that going to really impact your velocity and your speed on the ice. If you're a physical player, you're not probably playing a speed game. And so, it's like, do you really want to be carrying an extra 10 or 20 pound weight vest on the ice, while you're trying to be a max speed athlete? Or are you going to be a 4th line physical grinder that is going to be pushing on guys differently and like they can use that size to their advantage? I think every guy is maybe a little more fluid. The big thing that we've done here is we try to get our guys to run below 10. But ideally it's between that 8 and 10 range. And if we can maintain that across the year, you're in a great spot.
People think it's crazy when I tell them that I used to get fatter and heavier during the season. But like, do you see that? Do any because during the summer it's so easy to be super dialed. During the year there's so much of like an emotional, like when things are good, you play a good game, you go on the plane, you're like, oh, wine and cookie, I deserve it. You play bad, same thing, because you're like, fuck this. Do guys why was that do any other players get fatter during the year?
Yeah, it's on a spectrum. I mean, I think like we have guys that I think when we go in season, like the thing that we do is we track things like body weight. We'll do body comp like once every 2 to 3 months, just as like check-in points. But it's really like how consistent that you can match your nutrition and your energy intake relative to your expenditure. So I think like, you know, the old school problem was that in season, all of a sudden the guys would get done playing on a Saturday night and they're chugging down beers and pizza and they're eating a huge amount of calories. And then you do that week in, week out across a long period of time from October 1st to mid-April. Well, guess what? Over time, things add up. But then I think the other thing is that now we try to tell our guys, it's like, you know, you need to eat relative to your expenditure. On certain days when you're not practicing as long, you don't need to have the same amount of caloric intake. And then on other days, it needs to be really high as you get ready to carb load going into competition periods. And so there's a fluctuation in those things, and it's not just this always consistently high calorie in-season intake. And it really is like it's trying to eliminate processed foods and going after a whole food-based nutrition. And that alone gets guys into a much better spot behind their body comp and maintaining their health like across the season.
Everyone knows the general diet-specific stuff. But if you had an athlete came in, like, have you ever had an athlete come in who was like, I'm only doing the carnivore diet and this is what I do? Or do you kind of like, how do you think about diet in general for athletes? Because obviously it's different for every person.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing, or I shouldn't say even one thing, there's probably like the foundation behind how we educate our athletes is really a whole food forward diet, right? So if you can get 90% of your food intake from whole food sources, you're already setting the stage behind a way higher nutrient density, way less processed things that are going to spike insulin level or put your body into an inflammatory state. And then it's like looking at things like how much fruit and vegetable intake, so antioxidant or anti-inflammatory foods that can help mitigate the amount of inflammation that you have in season from practice, from travel, and all these other circumstances. And it's teaching guys habits behind like really how do they create a plate of food and how do they create consistency, knowing what their energy expenditure is going to be in season versus the off season, and making changes to those things as they go through the periods of time across the year.
So if an athlete did come in who said he was only sticking to a really strict diet that you didn't agree with, would you try and change it, or if it's working for them, you'd let it be?
Yeah, I think the big thing is we would take a look at like what would he be missing out of those things. Hockey, in a lot of ways, man, you're looking at an intermittent, high glycolytic sport, and so carbohydrate is the main energy source behind how these athletes refuel during competition, but also leading into competition and how they perform. So maybe there's like a day or two across the week where they can go purely carnivore, but then there's other days where they need to fluctuate the amount of carbohydrates they have coming in. If the athlete's more of just the avoidance of processed carbs or starchy carbohydrate, things like pastas, rice, sweet potato, and if the avoidance of those things, then maybe it's just leafy greens or vegetables with berries and other sources of carbohydrate. That wouldn't lead to, I think, the negative side that they may feel like bloated or having way too much carbohydrate intake relative to how they feel when adjusting carnivore. So I think there's always happy mediums, but you know, I think now what you've seen is that there's a rise behind athletes doing blood work. At the pro level, teams are investing into it. At the college level, you see athletes now investing into resources in the off season where they're doing blood markers once or twice in a year, and there's so many different companies out there that can support them behind understanding where their nutritional intake has led them behind biomarkers of inflammation, their gut health, their microbiome and probiotic intake, and how that impacts their immunology, their energy level, all those different areas that it's not just about carnivore and meat intake, it's about how to support holistic health, wellness, performance, recovery day to day, and doing that nutritionally every single week of the year and making sure you're pushing the boundaries of the nutrition and how it's putting involved.
Should every person be taking, like, everyone talks about gut health and like, I don't fully understand it or know enough about it. But like, should I be taking a prebiotic every single day?
Yeah, I think like the big thing to ask yourself is like how much food are you pulling in that would be prebiotic, probiotic, which is actually providing the actual organism of bacteria in your gut that actually make up your microbiome, and then postbiotic, the effect of what you're actually doing on that side and what's actually being done to create your immune system. So the majority of your immune system resides in your gut and how your body is working together on a cellular level to support your health. So if we have athletes that are going through and they're getting sick, more than a couple, like 3 times in a year, then we may start talking about things related to, like what are you eating? What's your food consumption look like? How are you supporting yourself from a sleep or a dietary side? And then how much fermented food are you consuming? So things like sauerkraut, yogurt, kimchi, it's looking at different areas to naturally get fermented food that is providing probiotics into your gut that can support those different areas behind your immune system, and then supporting with whole foods that are going to be the prebiotic food that your gut needs to really create an environment for you to flourish with your health.
What are you guys allowed to do on the supplement side of things at school?
Yeah, really the supplement side within the college environment is on the electrolyte side, on the protein side, and then vitamins, mineral intake, but you can't provide athletes things like creatine, which we still viewed as a performance aid that is not necessarily outside the dietary side of what an athlete would need on a regular basis. Which is interesting to me because out of maybe everything, creatine is one of those substances that out of the last 50 years of research has been proven time and time again that one, it's almost impossible for you to get enough creatine intake out of a diet. You'd have to eat 2 pounds of red meat in a day to meet a normalized 5-gram dose of creatine. So literally almost impossible for you to take in normal food circumstances. And yet it's also one of the main substances that your brain utilizes for energy. And it promotes, and now that you've seen more and more research being done behind brain health, post-concussion, and the increase with creatine improving post-concussion symptoms, and how it supports, normal, lean mass, and as an ergogenic aid, it's going to help you with strength, and it's going to help you with, increasing lean muscle mass in your body.
I take 5 to 10 milligrams a day, but I've read some stuff recently where some of these guys have said they've tried macrodosing it to the 20, 25, and they felt fantastic. Should I try it?
20 grams is actually if you look at a lot of the cognitive side behind either post-concussion, or if you look at the brain health side behind avoiding things like dementia or anything, it is at a very, very high dose. For most of our college athletes, it's one of those things that's dose dependent, and it's once you saturate the amount up, then it's saturated. So for most athletes, especially athletes under 180 pounds, 5 grams is plenty. But then there's probably some level of incremental increase for that quantity that needs to go up relative to the amount of lean mass that an athlete has. If you had a football player that was 300 pounds, or yourself, 300 pounds, they would need to be taking a higher consumption even just to meet their normal saturation of creatine.
I have a neighbor who's a hockey player. I think he's 12 or 13 who got a bad concussion. I was talking to his dad the other day, and I was going to recommend this to him. But do you think that would be too early for him to start taking that, or what's the age where you think you'd feel confident that kids can start taking it?
You know what? There's been no studies that show that creatine has any level of negative side effect for children. So when you look at creatine intake, it's a natural compound that's found within your body, within food, and it's also one of those substances that's nearly impossible, like I said, for you to consume dietary-wise. So I think if an athlete or an individual at a young age is in an appropriate level where their nutrition and they're interested in creating consistent habits and maximizing performance and supporting themselves behind things, I think that's the age that you can create consistency with what you're trying to do with either fermented foods or creatine or all these things that can support wellness. But I think they have to be in a situation to advocate for themselves and interested.
Do you guys do anything on the sports science side to help prevent concussions?
Yeah, but what's interesting is that University of Denver has been involved in a long-standing saliva study. So looking at spit markers behind really concussion. And so that's been involved through, I believe it's on our engineering department. And so our athletes for years were engaged into voluntary status behind being part of that study. I can't remember if it's still going on, but it's a pretty unique study nationally behind just I think marking out levels of concussion and then at what rate and if they can speed things up and using saliva as a marker behind.
Some guys have really looked into neck strengthening to help prevent concussions. Can that help? Should guys be doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Like when you look at research behind like neck strength, I mean, like I think when you look at one variable like neck strength concussion, like it's a really complicated situation. I mean, like in my mind, like the biggest thing that you can do is probably give an athlete better vision and keep their eyes up in practicing those habits. Because if you anticipate contact, or if you have better visual fields and you have better neck and thoracic rotation, and you can cover vision on the ice or in different sports, then that to me is actually probably even ahead of neck strength, because it's the anticipation of contact and then the reaction of stabilizing your neck and preventing that second rebound, off the ground and inside your head. But I think that there is a level of contribution. I think looking at things in isolation like that, like neck strength is going to prevent concussion, I think can lead people down, I think, a difficult subject matter behind, really like, are you just going to invest all of your offseason in neck strength and then hope that you don't get a concussion because your neck's just jacked? I think that it's a multifactorial situation, and that give somebody better vision, make sure that they're practicing, like keeping their eyes up within practice settings or within skill sessions, and being able to shoulder check and look over and constantly doing those things, strengthening their neck. With that is probably the most ideal situation.
I think one of the interesting things about concussions is just like you see guys throughout their career who never have concussions, get one, and are never able to recover. And you see other guys who seem to get them every year and then retire and are perfectly fine. But it's a very wide range of outcomes, and some of like the worst ones that guys go through come from what most people would view as like the smallest, most innocent hits.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's even the first one, in a lot of ways, can be the hardest on somebody. And then it's the upper echelon of the numbers, right? Like the more that you go through, the more difficult the recovery time can be in different circumstances. But yeah, there is a wide range of spectrum in how people handle concussion symptoms and the length of time. I think the big thing is that, like, what are you doing post-concussion to, I think, put yourself in a situation to create success? Like, when you look at a lot of the research, and it's eliminating stimuli as much as you can. It's like find a dark room, eliminate loud noises, things that are creating that cognitive stimulus that are like constantly acting on your brain when it's trying to recover. And then you look at now the research behind like creatine use or anti-inflammatory things like fish oil and other things that could potentially lead to an improved outcome post-concussion.
Have you ever looked into neurofeedback training at all?
Yeah, I think like when you look at like biofeedback or neurofeedback work, it's interesting because in the last 5 to 10 years, and actually even when I was in grad school at BU, we had a former professor that had created like a biofeedback room and had been involved with, I think it was the Maple Leafs, a couple EPL teams, and it's amazing, I think, to see the cognitive side and the side of brain stimulated biofeedback and how you can adjust heart rate, or even like the mental and emotional side of regulation, and what goes into athlete recovery and getting away from stress and stimuli. But I think it's in a lot of ways we're still at the forefront of like what's going on from that side, so it's really, really interesting to see.
On the athlete recovery side, the rise of fasting has kind of taken over most of America. How detrimental is it to do a hard workout and then not put anything in your system for several hours?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at a lot of research, I mean, like getting ample amount of like protein intake or carbohydrate intake immediately after a training session, I mean, it's been proven time and time again behind like what it can do in terms of like speeding up recovery and even amplifying results from training and adaptation. I think what you've seen is that there's also a benefit behind fasting and being able to put yourself in a situation where you restrict calories and what your body goes through to almost like really heal itself from the inside out on a cellular level. And mitophagy, which is like literally the removal of like almost like poor cells or cells that need to be turned over and cleaned out. So I think the thing that's interesting, you've had people like Huberman and Peter T and all these different experts out there, and the thing that they've kind of started to talk about is that like there's differences between intermittent fasting, full day fasts, multiple day fasts, and I think that's where like the inconsistencies in how people approach fasting, there's just such a spectrum in terms of an approach. I think that a lot of people can find positive change just on something like an intermittent fast, which is just within a day, where you're just basically creating a feeding window of 8 to 10 hours, and the rest of the day you go without food, but you still have normalized water intake or electrolyte intake. And it just allows your hormone levels to not get so frequently stressed behind insulin release. And then you have the opposite approach, which is maybe like once in a week or once every couple weeks where you go through a 24 to 48 hour fast. But I think for athletes, you have to be careful of like how many days you're going to go through, and is it going to create a decrease in lean mass or recovery during those periods, and the negative side of doing those things, because it can dramatically shift you in the opposite direction. So with anything, I think it's about looking at things objectively and figuring out what's going to work for the athlete at the right time in the right circumstances or the individual, and figuring out how those things come into play, to maintain health, wellness, and performance across the lifespan.
Have you ever done a long fast? Because I've literally told myself that I'm going to do a 72-hour one probably 100 times over the last couple of years. And then after about 24 to 26 hours, I'm like, all right, I'll do this next month.
Yeah, I've never done long fast. And honestly, if I did, it would probably be once in a year for a 2 to 3 day period, and then maybe just trying to do that once in a year. I think that when people overconsume calories habitually, and you're just constantly, especially consuming high calories with carbohydrate, your body at certain points just needs a break from the insulin side of things. And it's even I think it's actually valuable for individuals at different periods of time to go under caloric restriction from carbohydrate away from when they need to athletically perform. So maybe early off-season period, and improve sensitivity to carbohydrate and insulin, and then shift back into it as the off-season goes, because it helps re-regulate how you burn calories, how you utilize energy. But I think those things in the college environment can be difficult because you're working with college athletes, and we want all of our athletes to work with dietitians and people that can help provide them guidance behind their individual circumstances. So I think that's the most important thing, is that you work with the individual and not just creating general, recommendations across the entire team in different situations. But I think that there's definitely value in creating these different amounts of food consumption at different periods of time and what it can do to someone's health.
On the recovery side of things, I used to be an ice bath almost after every practice.
That's changed.
Yeah, that's changed a ton. Yeah. Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, my thing is that there's more and more research that have come out about chronic ice bathing. So if you ice bath every day, and especially if you're ice bathing immediately post-training, that it blunts adaptation. So if you think about really what's happening, is inflammation in some ways is a good thing, because you're creating blood flow in areas where tissue is trying to recover and it's trying to adapt from the stimulus of the workout of the training session that you're going through. So when you restrict blood flow, you're literally blunting your body's ability to recover and to adapt to that type of training stimulus. So now what we're seeing is we really try to make recommendations for athletes at different periods of time to just go through normal amounts of stress, adapt to it, and then utilize cold exposure very strategically when they've maybe crossed their normalized threshold behind stress, and it's a very abnormal situation. So, even for instance, the first couple weeks of our preseason period going into the first or even second competition week, we really tell our guys not to ice bath, because we need to adapt to stress in the beginning portion of the season. And then as the season goes on, we can start to utilize, cold exposure and things where we go into a single or a double overtime game or things like that, to then utilize it strategically so they actually get a better effect off of that one moment when we need them to recover, and not utilizing it day to day. So I think, ice bathing, twice in a week, it's not going to take away too much from what you're doing. But when you're ice bathing 4 to 5 times, and especially right after training, that's when you can run into problems behind adaptation and maximizing performance.
What do you think the ideal ice bath time is for people trying to maximize recovery?
Honestly, I tell our athletes, use cold exposure in the morning. Use it as a way of waking up, improving immunology. So what cold exposure does first thing in the morning is different than what it does immediately after training session. Creating cold exposure in the morning, what's really happening is it mobilizes your immune system. So you create even something like a 2.5-3 minute cold shower in the morning, stimulates your body to all of a sudden increase blood flow after you get out of that cold exposure. And so it kind of shocks your system, and it almost create a higher level of awareness. It improves blood flow, and it increases your internal body temp in response to the cold. and then it basically will tell your immune system to mobilize and create blood flow around your body, which is a great marker of like getting that immune system to stimulate. But what we don't do is tell our guys to use chronic ice bathing after training. Like if anything, it's like, hey, use it once in a week or every couple of weeks when you need it, make it more effective. And then we actually use heat exposure at different periods of time throughout the week to create like a low blood like exposure behind increasing blood flow, zone 2 heart rate without additional like physical load on your body. So you can sit in there, get heat exposure, and get heat shock protein stimuli, and really like creating better metabolism and creating sweat, which is a way for you to like literally get a lot of those toxins and things out of your body.
These cold plunge companies have, their marketing is saying that people are burning 300, 500 calories. You burn calories for the next 6 hours. Is any of that true?
Yeah, I think you'd have to look on an individual level. I think there's absolutely across the board, there's going to be an increase in metabolism when you get done, right? And it's your body shivering and you're dealing with an increase in heart rate in response to that cold exposure. But for how long it takes somebody to recover from that or how much metabolism is increased, all those things are going to be individually dependent.
The rise of Zyn and nicotine, like there's been data that's come out that says really small doses, I think it's 3 milligrams a day, can be very beneficial for like your brain, your body. Then obviously a lot of kids these days are now having hundreds of milligrams a day.
Yeah.
Is there scientific benefit to having small amounts of nicotine?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the nicotine side, but I think like just like anything with social media, it's people will always tip the scales in one direction or the other, and they'll take it too far, right? I think if you looked at the research behind nicotine use, like very small doses may be beneficial, like cognitively stimulating and help people focus. But then there's always going to be a tipping point behind your health or other aspects. Like, is it taking away from sleep? Is it going to make an impact behind your sleep quality and lasting in the evening, where you're still like going and you have a tough time falling asleep? And I'd say that absolutely you have to move away from nicotine use. Just like caffeine can be abused. The thing that we run into with hockey athletes is caffeine use going into game time. And if that game is starting at 7 p.m. and the half-life of caffeine is 6 hours, and they have the equivalent of, let's say, 200 or 300 milligrams of caffeine.
Which that's not even that much, right? That's like
2 to 300, that'd be like the equivalent of like 2 to 4 cups of coffee, depending on the type of coffee. Yeah. So, but at 6 hours, you have half of that still in your system. So that's why it's like guys get done with the game and they're still like completely juiced up on caffeine, and then all of a sudden they're not falling asleep till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not just the adrenaline side and the dump of like going in through competition, the stimuli of like loud bright light and noise exposure and the hormone side of playing. But a lot of the time it's also the half-life of caffeine is still trickling in their system for hours after they get done playing, and it's making an impact and taking away from sleep. So it's like we try to, same thing, it's like educate our guys on caffeine use. Can we decrease the amount that they're using down and make an appropriate smaller dose, and just making headway from that side and doing what we can to optimize recovery immediately after the game, which a lot of the time is they come down into this environment, we can turn the lights down, we don't play music after a game, we do things that are, push them more towards a parasympathetic tone, which is, can we get them to do like slow breathing, we do them like static stretching, easy foam rolling in areas that have high amounts of tension, and it's shifting them away from that sympathetic stress of playing and competing, especially under stimulants.
So if I walked into the room pregame on a Friday or Saturday, are guys still hammering like Red Bulls and Monsters?
Yeah. It's the education side. I'd say it's way less from energy drinks like Red Bull and Monsters, things like that. I'd say it's the caffeine side on coffee is still always going to be the most prevalent within the team, and it's like guys using those, especially going into like travel and dealing with different circumstances with changing time zone, and a consistent way of like using that as a stimulant going into competition.
You guys fly private everywhere now. You don't even have to worry about travel.
A couple times every year, so it's not a consistent thing, but it is strategically used when we head out east, or in moments where it can dramatically change our ability to get back at an appropriate time to get a quality night of sleep on site.
I want to shift gears a little bit. Everyone talks about culture in sports, and it's such a generic topic. Like, I'm interviewing our boy after this. He's going to say the word 100 times. I'm going to roll my eyes. But have you noticed anything about that's different between the teams that are winning here now versus like when I was going to school versus just kind of how things have changed over the years?
I just think that, like, I mean, the thing that's created success is just consistency and how we, like I think of, like, even something as simple as onboarding our freshmen. Like, we take our incoming freshman class, we get them into classes the summer before their freshman year. So now they're not transitioning in the fall of their freshman year and dealing with, like, such an abrupt, like, all of a sudden they're starting their year and they're trying to figure out how to, like, deal with the college environment. It's like, can we shift them up, educate them on how to be successful in our environment, educate them on how to train appropriately or to make an impact behind their physical development ahead of time. And then it's like getting, I think, the investment level behind everything related to health, wellness, performance, their skill development on the ice, committing to details behind what they're trying to do within practice, and the intent behind it is honestly the biggest thing that I've seen is just that we have guys come in and we're speeding up the process behind development and their commitment to our approach behind, you know, how we train, how we practice, and how we create success year in and year out.
Who's a guy you've trained over the years that you had in college who went on to have a pro career that I wouldn't say surprised you, but it surprised other people within the sport?
I mean, there's a bunch. I mean, like, I honestly, I view that as maybe one of the biggest success things that we do here is that we take players that are drafted between the second all the way down to the seventh round, and then we have free agents that I think leave here, and then all of a sudden they're playing at a higher level than what they're projected to ever play at. You know, like Troy Terry, I think was a fourth or fifth round draft pick, and he kept developing, kept making a change by his development, went from basically 160 pounds to playing at 193 pounds. Then figured things out at the NHL level after a few years of in and out play at the pro and at the AHL level, and then was a two-time NHL All-Star. Then I look at other guys like our departing captain, Carter King, who's a free agent, who went from coming in halfway through his freshman year, developing himself and committing to his development. And by the time that he left here as a senior was, you know, in the top, I think, 10 or 15 in the country behind goals scored. It was more than 20 goals across the season, and has created way more success than anyone ever thought he was going to, and became the person that he is through his hard work and his dedication toward our team.
A lot of people have given you credit for not only the success of sport teams that have had, but you have a lot of guys who have worked for you here, who have gone on to then get really cool jobs. How are you managing your time here? I mean, you're overseeing 5 or 6 different teams, but you obviously still have the time to manage other people and move them on.
Yeah, I think, like, from a staffing perspective, you know, we have a difference, I think, in terms of, like, how we hire. Like, we ask the tough questions and we try to figure out personality type, not only just the X's and the O's, but, like, how committed are you going to be to pushing the boundaries of your team and being creative behind it? You know, I think the big thing is that this is an environment where anyone can come in, and I think gain a lot of perspective and see a spectrum of approach. So it's not that everyone's doing anything that I'm doing, it's that they have continually, I think, pushed the boundaries of their own development because this is an environment where you can continually learn every single year. They have access to great resources at a smaller institution. None of our full-time staff have more than 2 teams. We have, you know, when I first got here, I think we had 3 full-time coaches, and now we have 6 full-time, 3 part-time, and interns. And so no matter where somebody comes in, whether it's an intern, a part-time fellow, or a full-time staff member, you're put in a situation where you can see a lot of unique approaches that everyone here is committed to their own individual development, and everyone wants to push the boundaries of these teams and work with our coaches at a really high level. And we've just continually seen that snowball effect and that growth opportunity of these people moving on. So we've had, you know, guys like Matt Van Dyke, who's now, you know, basically the head of performance for the Texans. I've had guys in NFL move on to the Celtics. I've had somebody else move on to the NBA. And we've had a lot of people move into college hockey. Most recently, one at Duluth and another one at University of Miami, Ohio, on the college hockey side, as well as an AHL level. But I think, like, all these individuals have put in and dedicated themselves towards pursuing, you know, a high level of understanding, but also taking things with perspective that any environment they go into, they're going to have to think critically about those environments and what they can bring to the table and how they can grow themselves every single year.
If I was coming in to apply for one of those jobs, what's a tough question you'd have me on in the area?
We like adversity questions, like what's the most amount of adversity you've ever experienced in your life, and what was that situation like, and how did you overcome it? We like people that have gone through tough situations, whether it was personal or individual, and can they open up and be vulnerable in those situations? And then sometimes it's professional situations where people, I think, they've put in tough situations with their coaches, with student athletes, and they've had to navigate a professional environment differently. I think the thing that we look at, right, is how an individual communicates during an interview. Everyone is going to provide a resume on paper. And so then it's about communication skills, leadership, and how you can teach all these things, because coaching is teaching. And so our ability to communicate these things to a student athlete, to a coach, and get them on board with your style of training or dealing with situations is going to be an imperative part of like what we do day to day. And so how you interview and how you communicate during the interview process is our first exposure behind how you would handle situations.
When I was going to school here, there was almost no communication between the strength and conditioning coach and the head coach. Like it was like basically you go to these workouts, you work out twice a day. When you leave there, you go practice. It seems like that's changed a lot. Like you guys are in constant communication with all the coaches you're working with.
Yeah, I mean, what's cool is I think like when we started with Catapult, and this is almost 10 years ago, when you start to have information coming in behind what's going on within a practice, right, on the IMA level, heart rate side, the player load side, it's an opportunity for coaches to better understand what they're prescribing behind drill selection. It's an opportunity for us to help kind of figure out how we should lay these things out and make sure that our practice stress is aligning with when the competitions are occurring, or when we need to taper, or how to handle the first third against the middle third against the back third of the year. And so it opens up lines of communication differently than just being a strength coach isolated and not having any level of understanding of what's actually going on in practice. So I think the rise of technology has changed how we've approached and communicated with our coaches, in that we can help them understand what's being done on like a tissue level, like how much stress is their tissue and their muscle tissue going under, versus how much stress their heart rate and their internal side is going under. How are athletes sleeping, and how are all these things working together to create recovery and optimal performance when competition processes.
A doctor recently told me that for longevity purposes, you have a higher chance of dying younger with a low VO2 score than you do smoking like 2 packs of cigarettes a day. With a high VO2?
Yeah.
Do you guys do any VO2 testing? Or I know that in the NHL level, they actually just banned in the new CBA any type of fitness testing, which teams are going to find a way to get around. Do you guys have a generic fitness test for the team every year?
Yeah, our test is different. So we do a 7-mile Airdyne ride, which is, I mean, if you think about like almost like a steady state VO2 max test, that's essentially what it is. The first like 5 minutes, it's like moderately hard, and then as you hit higher levels and the time goes up, your heart rate will continue to progress to maximal level and at your VO2 threshold. And it's roughly a 14 to 16 minute test. And we have time standards that are based on the height and the weight of the athlete, and it's something that we've yearly done as a marker behind their fitness level and their conditioning status going into preseason on a very general level, such as biking. I think the hard thing about college environments is that our athletes go home at different periods of time. Some will have access to ice, some will not. So their ability to do something like biking is maybe the most consistent thing that they can do from a fitness perspective. And we don't have to evaluate them on the ice, where the ice is going to degrade, and then you're going to end up trying to figure out how much of an impact that's made on the tests. Or it's like the intermittent speed side, it's hard to test, like in doing like repeated shuttles on the ice and creating standards behind that. So it's an easy, consistent way for us to evaluate our athletes from a time perspective relative to their body weight.
You're one of the smartest people I know in sports performance. You've turned down a ton of really cool opportunities because you love being here. What would be a job or a position that you just couldn't say no to, whether that was sports science of one of the biggest Premier League teams, whether it was being an individual coach for guys like LeBron James, but what would be your dream in this field?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something interesting about like managing one individual across like every side of their health wellness performance, right? Like, I mean, that allows you to get so granular with detail, but then I think at some point, like, it's going to get boring working with one individual, right? So I think, being in an environment where, and this is where there's no such job out there, right? Where if you could be in a pro environment working with elite athletes and helping to manage a staff that's dedicated toward that side for both the sports science and the actual strength and conditioning sports performance side, and the dietetics, the sports psych side, how all those different sides come together. And without the travel requirements of pro sport and maintaining, the lifestyle of having a family and being there for our family, then that would be something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I don't know if those jobs exist out
Yeah.
there, but maybe we'll find one.
Yeah.
Final question for you. What does the ultimate success look like for you over the next 10 years, both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, it's just continuing to push the boundaries of, I think, what we can do within a college environment like DU, which is a small, mid-major private institution that doesn't have the same amount of NIL funding or funding coming internally within our athletics department, and yet have still continued to generate more and more success on the national landscape across our teams. I think that with the changes now with NIL and institutions being able to, I think, fund and pay players, there's going to be a new challenge on the forefront of college athletics, and how big of an influence that's going to make in terms of team success when you're paying players and trying to go after these elite athletes and paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars. That'll be a new challenge for us to navigate. But I think it's continuing to be creative behind, I think, putting that to the wayside and knowing that that's probably never going to be our game, and continuing to develop our athletes to an even higher extent and pushing the boundaries of their development to always be in the running for national championship every year.
As a DU fan and alumni, I wouldn't like this necessarily, but what if an Alabama or Texas called you to run their whole football program?
Yeah, I mean, like, football to me is like it's a viewed subject. Like, when I had my experience with Harvard and South Carolina with football at the SEC level as an intern, I think it's interesting. If you have a team of 100 athletes and you're managing all these different positions, and it's a really complicated situation. But I think looking at what those coaches have gone through and the stress on their families, like moving every 2 years and dealing with the carousel of coaching change and environmental change, it's just not something that I'm interested in.
Cool. Well, this was awesome. Thanks,
Awesome,
dude.
man. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Oh my God, my fucking
Got my ass.
Oh my God.
Push the boundaries there.